Okay, so here we are looking at King Phillips War. Just finished playing this, and let's do try not to knock the table because this is gonna fall if I do, and that'd be terrible. All right, great. Okay, so what do you get with this? Like I said, you get your map, you get some alright counters. I mean, you can't really complain too much about them. Some of the coloring, there's a mistake on them. But once you start playing, it's not really of any effect. Yeah, glossy rule book. Some people love them. I'm not a big fond person for such. And the numbering, the way they're laid out, I would, again, much rather have the more detailed rules that you'd see from, say, the Gamers games under the same MMP imprint as these. But this is a fairly light game, so it's not too painful to work your way through these. And to tell you the truth, even though reading them doesn't give you a really good idea straight through, playing around with the pieces, etc., and taking a look at what's going on, it does. And I think, like many of the games with this format that I complain about, it may have more to do with the unfamiliar concepts that these games all try to push forward. And this one has a few, although at heart it feels almost like a CDG style game with the point-to-point map and all the issues involved with that. But it's like a CDG style game if you remove the cards. Okay, so most of the CDG games have this kind of nice aspect of the cards being a fairly complex set of parameters that you play within the game, some historical events, etc. And those are removed from this, which is both a good and a bad thing. On the good side, it takes away having to memorize a deck of random events to be able to play competitively. On the bad side, or maybe even at all well, or realistically, or historically, as in the case of things like Paths of Glory, but on the bad side, it strips you down to a game that hardly suffices. You know, the base, it really shows that core mechanism in the point-to-point CDGs is so much less than what we're used to in the more complex or more, it's not even necessarily complex because there's a lot of special cases hidden in a CDG. I'm going to say the more traditional style of wargame, either area movement or hex movement, that there's very little to a point-to-point system when it really comes down to it, in general. It doesn't have to be that way, obviously. Some games have enough additional stuff, but just the sheer movement and combat, and area systems tend to have the same effect. But hex systems tend to give you a very good detail of what's going on in terms of maneuvering, etc. There isn't really the same kind of maneuvering in this game. Now, one of the reasons for that, there's the potential for some pretty interesting maneuvering, and with all these little dots and everything, you've got a lot of area that you could conceivably swing around in. But when it comes down to it, the goals in the game kind of preclude a lot of maneuvering. You want to defend your territory, and you want to raid your enemy's territory, so you kind of want to be up at the front. You can't really just slip away. I mean, you could, but you're probably exposing something you've wanted to defend. There's almost always places, though, that you can go find to try and destroy the other person's property. So it might be a game for... the maneuver game might come in place if you're trying to push the last few victory points to get yourself towards 30. I was never at that point, and I didn't want to give a lot of freedom to the enemy, but I think there were too many times where my natives kind of fought the set-piece battle that's expected of them rather than running away and trying to find a better attack. The problem is, again though, you're usually sitting on stuff you want to defend, and you really don't want to leave it. Once you start getting those tribes that are on the far ends of the battlefield and not right in that center Rhode Island mix, then I think it becomes a lot easier to maybe run around a little bit. But there's not much point in running around if there's no enemy at all there, if the colonists aren't placing anything. Anyway, it ends up playing very, very simply, as though there aren't a lot of moves to make. Now, maybe this is just me being very naive. Maybe there's a lot more to this game than it feels like. But as a game, it doesn't feel like there's a terrible, great amount of strategy that you can try to push forward here. It doesn't really seem like you're going to be setting this massive trap and catching someone like you would in some other war games. The actual one thing that I didn't mention, you got these nice player aid chart, and you got one for each player. I never show one, but there really are two. They provide pretty much almost everything you need from the rules. So once you've read the rules and kind of grok them, you can look at this and understand most of what you need. There's a few little pieces that are left out of here. For example, I think reactions. Oh, no, they're hidden down here in the battle area, which is a little weird because evasion is part of the battle, but interception isn't. It's kind of this pre-battle thing that should be happening over here. But where do you put it? Okay. So yeah, it carries almost everything. There may be a few little key points you have to look up during the game, but once you're used to it, everything should be here, and you'll be pretty good with that. And what else do I have to say about it? I mean, this is not the kind of game that's really in my core taste range. It's certainly the topic is a very interesting one in the sense that nobody's done anything on this before, and it's in a time period that is of interest to me, a location that's of interest. I know almost nothing about it, which makes it hard to bring a lot of excitement to it, but it pleases me more than, say, say a light treatment of this nature of something that we've seen a lot of light treatments of. For example, the feudal Japanese stuff. Yeah, we've seen a ton of light treatments on that. Still haven't seen anything kind of detailed on it. Medieval Europe, same thing. A lot of lighter treatments. No one's really done the detail on it. Now, we've seen some things like 30 Years' War starting to get covered now, and maybe some of the other wars that are less touched before are getting a little bit more attention, but these always are really tough sells for the company. And so one has to kind of say, I salute Multiman for putting this out at all, because it's it's such a rare topic, and GMT's been putting out a lot of these types of things. I still have this, though, real wish that people would put out sort of real war games on these kind of obscure periods. There's not a lot. When you take a CDG of this nature would be light enough, something like Wilderness War. You look at it, you play, you say, I don't know if it's a war game or not, but it feels like it's kind of simulating the actions you're taking. And here, it sort of feels like I'm simulating the actions I'm taking too. But it's only sort of. It's in that A House Divided type flavor. It's not in the same flavor as, say, what would be comparable for this? I don't really know. I would go with maybe, Zucker's Napoleonics is kind of the closest thing time period wise that's been covered this way. There's some ancient stuff that's been covered this way, but very, very little. Well, yeah, this is I'm just trying to think of something that went into real detail. 30 Years War isn't too bad. It's sort of halfway between what I'd call those very light games that this kid obviously is, and what I'd consider to be a detailed war game. But I've had this discussion many times, and it's great to see these topics get coverage, but it kind of saddens me because when you see something this light, it isn't terribly well linked to the period. It doesn't feel like you're making the key kinds of decisions on the raids, etc. And in fact, with this, I felt less that I was making these big penetrating raids that I felt like in my little taste of Wilderness War, and more that I was really kind of fighting almost a World War I battle throughout the whole thing. Limited casualties, units didn't get blown away. There was, I feel like there should be hidden units or something like that. All there is the scouts and the spies, which are an interesting little mechanism. They work neat. There's a number of interesting little mechanisms in this. That's one of them where you can affect. Well, first of all, it affects your movement capabilities all over the place, but it also affects your combat in the sense that somebody can force you to re-roll the dice. And then this little event die is a cute little aspect as well. Meaning that as battles happen, more and more weird things kind of happen. That allows you to get some additional troops, etc. Whether or not a massacre makes sense under every condition, something has happened that creates that effect. And sometimes you may have to juggle it around in your head a little bit. But overall, my feeling with this is, yeah, I'm glad I didn't pay full price for it. I looked at it. It had kind of a interesting topic. But I looked enough to understand, yeah, this is just going to be another one of them light games. Am I glad that I ended up buying it anyway? Yeah, I think so. But I certainly, if I didn't feel a need to cover a lot of different topics throughout my collection, if I would be a lot less pleased with this if I didn't really, if my monetary situation was at all tight, I would be kind of unhappy at having bought this because it's not really what I'm looking for. It's not that sort of, grail game on the topic. I don't know if one can be made. I don't know if the market could possibly sustain a serious war game on such an obscure topic, to tell you the truth. And that kind of saddens me because often it's the obscure topics that interest me the most. But I can't complain about this like I can say about No Peace Without Spain, which I feel is such a big war that it deserves the more detailed treatment that it didn't get there. It's a great game, but it just saddens me when it doesn't hit my hopes. All right.